Okay, let's get started. Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the last parallel session of the Degrees Global Forum held here in the cozy and intimate Rhino Room. We are here to talk about building bridges across disciplines, is what was originally in the title, but as we met and spoke and dived somewhat into the longer text, I think the spectrum of bridges which we will be addressing are not just disciplinary bridges, but are multiple in nature. So I'm Jesse Reynolds. I'm with the Degrees Initiative as Chief of Staff. However, before being at an NGO, I've been an academic, particularly working in areas that involve interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary research. In fact, I have a degree in chemistry and I've got a degree in environmental policy. So I've done the best that I can. So I'm a moderator, but I am going to open up with just a couple sentences of my own perspective and then hand the floor over to my colleagues who I will, I'll introduce them as they take the floor. Why don't we do it that way? So the key questions today are how we're going to make collaboration across not just epistemic bridges, but also regional, institutional, methodological as well. And what does that mean in the particular context of SRM? And how has such bridge building played out in the professional careers of our speakers today? And of course, we'd like to keep this as an informal kind of intimate dialogue, so our interventions here initially will be relatively short. We're aiming for 7 minutes, and then we'll just open the floor for, well, I'll have a couple of follow-up questions, and then we'll open up the floor hopefully for more of a wide-ranging conversation. So what I'll say comes from wearing my primary hat as working at the Degrees Initiative, where noticeably we started with climate modeling. Back in 2018, our first round of grants was not just climate modeling, it was impacts modeling. So not scenarios and not observations, but impacts. Now, why did we do that? We did not do that because we somehow privilege natural sciences or privilege climate modeling, but primarily because after at least 6 years of several dozen workshops around the world, that was the primary message that we heard from policymakers and other stakeholders was, what would SRM mean for us in terms of the physical things that we care about? Agriculture, water supply, flooding, biodiversity, etc. Those were the top tier questions. So we put that out first. But to be honest, it also helped that these were easier to administer, right? Climate impacts is a relatively more easily defined box. But we always wanted to have a social science program as well. So you may know that we moved on and expanded into the social sciences with a call about 1.5 years ago, giving out the grants last summer. And three of my guests here are on our social science teams. And it turns out that this in and of itself, just a social science grant, was rather complicated because what is social sciences? How do we juggle disciplines ranging from philosophy to ethics to economics to quantitative political science? And then we have to match them with reviewers, and we match them with research collaborators, and we bring them together. And even that in and of itself, our social science program, I would characterize as fairly interdisciplinary. It's more or less the full spectrum of social sciences. But nevertheless, even there's a few teams that go a step further where there's some linkages between an SPF team and, that's one of those 3-letter acronyms, social science teams and our modeling teams, or where the social science teams have natural scientists playing a role. The ones that I identified were the Pakistan team. We've got Hassaan here. The Argentina social science team, where we have Maria Inés and Ines. And the Ghana team with Portia Williams. And the Philippines team with Lorena Sabino. So there in and of itself, they have that bridge building. So having said that initial sort of frame setting about how degrees has approached disciplinarity and interdisciplinary, given the constraints that we have. I will turn the floor over to our first speaker, who is Julia Guivant. She is a professor at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil.
Thank you, Jesse, for the presentation. And I am very glad to be here with my colleagues and the audience to discuss this issue that I really consider very, very important. So let's reflect about the challenges of interdisciplinarity in SRM research. Comparing with climate research, that gradually it had built institutional structures for interdisciplinary work, even if uneven, SRM remains, from my point of view, in an early phase where disciplinary boundaries are still very sharp, with a division of labor. Natural scientists model climate impacts and develop technical scenarios, while social scientists, as ourselves, are asked to manage the social side, to assess public attitudes, help with communication, or make research more publicly acceptable. This we can see in reports, policy reports, governance proposals, and even interdisciplinary research initiatives, although there are few, that suggest that public engagement can be enhanced through better communication, social research, or participatory strategies. But this framework represents both the nature of the challenge and the role that we social scientists can play. And so this often places social sciences, I'm speaking about them in a global manner, including sociology, anthropology, in a reactive and instrumental position that, rather than co-shapers of research agendas. So, how social sciences are actually being mobilized in SRM research. I will point some topics that illustrate a quite reductionistic perspective on social science, like reduced to instrumental role. So public participation is seen as a tool for legitimacy. Risk that was discussed in some way today in the morning. Risk perception is framed without politics. Social science is like a scenario decoration, no, that is added in some moment in the research, mainly at the end. And ethic is reduced to compliance. Ethical questions are frequently approached through a checklist. Transparency, consent, reversibility, etc. And the global south, that we also represent here, some of the speakers, is not seen as a social actor, political or economic actor. It's like more a variable where appears as a vulnerability index in a perspective of geography, of risk exposure. So what all these have in common? The role of social science is to assist, explain, or stabilize, and not to critique, reframe, or contest, as I think should be. Or, well, it's an horizon to reach. Because there is no discussion in general about the assumptions that are involved in SRM models about global cooperation, what is, institutional capacities, legitimacy, acceptable levels of risk. These are really explicit. So that's a real topic to consider from the social sciences, to be in the beginning of the research and not at the end or as a secondary or an ex contribution. But we cannot be unrealistic. We cannot have too much expectations about how to do this. So this takes me to a second question that we were discussing, and how we can face these challenges. The most common are, in general, mentioned as institutional, a problem of funding, etc. But I would like to speak about emotional challenges that arise in interdisciplinary collaboration. And they are some of these challenges from personal and affective, let's say, perspective. There is the identity threat. Many researchers are very confident when they are in their own discipline, but very insecure when they are exposed to other areas where their expertise is no longer necessary. A second problem is a fear of judgment. Social scientists, like myself, may worry about sounding too abstract in technical discussions. We felt, maybe, that in this forum, by their way, natural scientists may hesitate in political or ethical debates because they lack. I am not a psychologist, I am an environmental sociologist, but sometimes psychological safety is necessary. And when it is lacking, people remain silent. Let's see later in the debate here how we feel about this. And the third, is how we can let go disciplinary norms. Let it go. No, that's not just methodological, it's emotional. Sometimes we attach too much to our areas, to our standards, to our values, so it's difficult to have a relaxed dialogue, I think. Then there is the power asymmetries that we can see here too. Social scientists, we know when we are dealing with natural or climate scientists, we feel not the same, treated at the same way. We are not the science, like, with S, main S. So, and finally, we need to acknowledge bounded awareness. This is an important concept, I think, about our tendency to overlook perspectives that don't fit our mental models. That isn't just at the cognitive level, it's emotional too. It's easier to stay with what feels familiar, and so in interdisciplinary teams, we look people that work more or less in the same areas, but sub-areas, let's say, and not very broad interdisciplinary perspective. So what can we do? I don't know. I don't have very much answers to this, but I think we can start acknowledging that interdisciplinarity, that is a desire, I guess, that we have, isn't just a technical or cognitive task. It's emotional and relational one. It requires building trust and safety, allowing space for uncertainty, hesitation, and even conflict, and mostly conflict, let's say, recognizing and crediting emotional labor, and being willing to slow down. What does it mean? Not always we can be it doesn't mean to be less rigorous, but we need to have time to be more reflexive about our values, about our, what we can call metacognitions, about working together. And so interdisciplinarity is not only about crossing differences about areas, but as well between people. And we are that, and that is much an emotional practice as an intellectual one. I was going to speak about my experience, but I rushed out of I am out of time, so maybe later. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Julia. Our next speaker is María Inés Carabajal. She is an assistant researcher at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. To you, please.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. What is building bridges, right? That is the main question of this session. For me, complex problems at the intersection of climate politics and society demand inter- and transdisciplinary approaches. We all know that this is a widely recognized topic in these fields, but yet putting into practice, strengthening and improving such collaborations often prove to be more challenging than expected. We all know that and we recognize it. So building bridges requires both personal and professional skills that we are rarely taught through conventional academic training. It is an experimental or experiential process, something that we learn by doing. Not every scientist must be interdisciplinary, but those committed to crossing disciplinary boundaries must be willing to listen, learn, and reflect continuously, both individually and collectively. Interdisciplinary work takes time. It requires developing a common ground, a shared language, and also mutual trust. This cannot be rushed. They grow through sustained interactions over time and the creation of safe, inclusive spaces for individual and collective learning. SRM is a particularly complex and controversial field. Researching SRM is a response to a global crisis that may demand decisive interventions in the near or distant future. While technical considerations and modeling are essential, we need to reduce uncertainty, they are not enough. If we are able, or if we want to produce effective, just, and inclusive responses to the climate crisis, we must also pluralize perspectives, acknowledging diverse cultural values, risk perceptions, and the contextual stakes for different communities in different places. So interdisciplinary collaboration may feel like a paradox, or even a luxury in times of crisis and urgency. But if our goal is to produce knowledge that is relevant, salient, and legitimate, we must then take the time to reflect on what kind of knowledge we would like to produce and with whom. So building bridges means committing to that process. The second question is, how does one go about fostering collaboration across disciplines? So this is a very challenging question. I follow a scholar, and he wrote that interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity is a way of being, right? So over the past 10 years, I have been working on interdisciplinarity topics. I also work as a Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow at the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. So I work on science policy, science advice, and I think that navigating these boundaries is really, really complicated. It's not easy, but it's deeply enriching in many ways. So one of the major challenges is how we can dismantling hierarchies of knowledge, as Julia have just said. In climate-related research, for instance, mathematical models and scenarios often dominate how we imagine the future and inform decisions. These tools are essentials, we know that, but they are not neutral. they represent just one way of performing the future. Equally important are the roles of human agency, creativity, and grassroots innovations, which often emerge from live experiences and bottom-up approaches. So the global nature of climate change creates a disconnection between the temporal and spatial scales of natural and social sciences and humanity. While Earth scientists often work at planetary or long-term scales, the social science bring attention to local realities, short-term decision-making, and the perspectives of communities most affected by climate change and environmental change. So their knowledge systems are different but complementary. So how can we combine the partiality of models with sociocultural, okay, got me the time. I'm very good. Great. Yeah.
Half the screen, just half the screen. Notes and time.
Okay, great. So how can we combine the partiality of models with sociocultural and local scientific knowledge to build a more inclusive picture of climate change? This is not just a disciplinary challenge. It's also test or challenge the relationship between quantitative and qualitative knowledge and how we define what counts as evidence. So in my experience, there are 3 key steps fostering meaningful collaboration. The first one is to start with shared problem framing. Interdisciplinary collaboration works best when scientists co-define the questions and establish common priorities from the beginning of a project. So early stage dialogue helps uncover assumptions, align objectives, and ensure that diverse perspectives are valued from the beginning. This is not simple because, as Julia said, some funders ask teams to present a technical or a natural science perspective and then humanities at the same time, but they not co-create the questions, the research questions, or how the research is going to be done in the future. So this is something really important because social scientists can contribute a lot with SRM, for example, how we can build legitimate knowledge, working with people, public perception. We know that this is important, but funders often start with the modeling. So that is something that maybe in the future we can change it. Okay, let's have a call including natural and social scientists working together at the same time, co-creating questions and problems and priorities. We have Inés Camilion in our team, but it's not so common to have this kind of mixed approaches in the same team. The second is invest in mutual learning. So real collaboration requires time to understand what other disciplines can bring to the table. It also demands conscious efforts to reduce power asymmetries, especially in contexts where some types of expertise, often technical or quantitative, are treated as more legitimate than others. And the third one, my third recommendation, is to create inclusive structures for ongoing interactions. This means designing spaces and mechanisms that support long-term engagement, not just one workshop at the beginning of the process. This can include shared fieldwork, joint writing, and collaborative assessment criteria that reflects diverse disciplinary trajectories. So inclusive spaces requires sustained interactions over time. It's not just one workshop or one gathering at the initial process. It just works together along the process, exchanging knowledge, perspective, and write together. Because in the social science, we wrote about public perception without including the perspective of the modeling. And models sometimes do not include the perspective of social science, humanities, or people perspectives. Maybe economics are at the boundaries, but if we talk about anthropology or sociology, it's not that way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maria Inés. Let's continue with our next. Oh, yes. And of course, we will applause for Julia as well. I was in such a hurry that I failed to allow for applause. Okay, moving on to my left is my colleague and friend Hassaan Sipra, who wears multiple hats. And I will name one or two, and if he can clarify which hat he's wearing, or if it's an entirely different one, please do so. He is Director of Global Engagement at the Alliance for Just Deliberation on Solar Geoengineering, colloquially known as DSG. He's also a senior researcher. I think you're still a senior researcher at ComStats University, correct? Okay. Over to Hassaan to correct me.
No, I am no longer a senior researcher at ComStats, but I am still a team member on both the degrees SPF and the DMF projects that are out of Pakistan. I'll talk more about them in the context of this conversation. And I want to just echo what my colleagues have already said, and I'm sure Ben will also say. It's a complex problem. In all of our engagement work with DSG, we tend to ask people in our workshops, if you could describe SRM in one word, what would it be? And complex, complicated, number one on that list in every single time. So because it's a complex question, inherently there has to be interdisciplinarity linked to it. And that interdisciplinarity is really crucial to answering one key question: whether or not this is a good idea or a bad idea. The exploration of that cannot be done just on scientific basis. It has to look at it from other technical perspectives, political, legal, ethical, economic, all of those get connected. And I think we're all quite familiar with that much of it. But as I was looking into it, I always go back to the Crutzen paper because for so many people that is a seminal paper in it. And Ben just used the word prescient when we were talking about it earlier, just how prescient that paper is. Its final paragraph is basically, in conclusion, the first modeling results and arguments presented in this paper call for active scientific research of the kind of geoengineering discussed in this paper. The issue has come to the forefront because of the dilemma facing international policymakers, who are confronted with the task to clean up air pollution while simultaneously keeping global climate warming under control. Scientific, legal, ethical, and societal issues regarding the climate modification scheme are many. Building trust between scientists and the general public would be needed to make such a large-scale climate modification acceptable, even if it would be judged to be advantageous. And of course, he ends by saying mitigation must remain the priority. So it's a weird situation where you have researchers who have a bunch of climate expertise and also in other domains have been trying to resolve this problem for a long time. But at the end of the day, there is no person who is an SRM researcher. Every single person who you might have met at DSG who might call themselves a researcher, they came to SRM as a subject, as a topic rather than as a subject or a domain. It's a singular problem that is trying to be resolved rather than an entire field. So like Dan is a climate modeler, for example, but he came to SRM through the field of looking into numerical modeling, dynamical downscaling, or however many other fancy words there might be for that. And that might be true for a wide variety of you. So in essence, I guess the point is SRM is an interdisciplinary subject or a topic because nobody here is really just an SRM researcher. We're all coming at it from different places, from different frameworks and theoretical underpinnings. That's crucial to understand. And in that vein, I want to speak more about our work in Pakistan, where we started thinking about this in late 2018 and had an opportunity to go to the GeoMIP event that was happening in Beijing in 2019 and really start to try to engage with this topic a little bit more. And as we understood it, we realized, okay, there's this climate modeling assessment part to it, which my boss was more interested in. And I was like, all right, cool, I can do a little bit of this work. But I started to realize more and more how much the governance, political, socioeconomic aspects were relevant for discussions, especially if you're making the case that Global South researchers need to be more involved. The very basic case why they need to be involved is because of the impacts are going to cause socioeconomic political pain. And so if you aren't teaching researchers in the Global South to also take those factors into account, you're not really helping them or lifting them up to achieve the very mandate that an organization like Degrees is set out to do. And so I was very happy when Degrees announced the SPF projects. I was super excited. And we applied for the SPF project as ComStats University as well. And I remember this because Dr. Uthar, after the interview process and everything, what Jesse was interviewing him on, asked him a question, and one we had prepared for, which was, hey, you guys are like a climate modeling team. Why are you, how are you going to manage doing a socio-political project? And we said it's very simple. We are changing the team up. So members from the modeling team, a couple of them transferred over because they brought that knowledge, but we brought in new actors who had more sociopolitical backgrounds in terms of their subject matter. And the reason we were able to do that is because we have in ComStats a singular person who is maintaining an overarching vision for the whole process of our exploration of SRM around the South Asia region. That's Professor Uthar at ComStats University. He's the PI for all the multiple projects that we have now been able to get, including most recently the ARIA project. So yay, that's a good, nice little victory for us. But because there's been that consistency and a crucial player has been at the top looking at how to make sure which new subject matter experts we need to bring in. That consistency has allowed us to grow over the last 5-6 years and get more and more funding to look into this topic. While at the same time, every single person who works on these projects more or less is not full-time on these projects. They have many other interests and topics that they're exploring, and those also inform SRM research. So I just wanted to speak more from this practicality perspective of what interdisciplinary could actually look like. And in line with that, as I've worked more and more on the DSG side of things, we've come to understand that these various perspectives, supporting them, bringing them into engagement activities, introducing different types of research domains to each other, providing spaces, as María Inés said, where they can meet and speak and workshop things together, and then be able to bring that back and say, hey, these were the core points, this is an outcomes report, these were the things that you guys discussed. What are now the resources you need in order to facilitate moving the scientific knowledge into a more communicative way towards other kinds of stakeholders, policymakers, grassroots civil society actors, so that they get an understanding. What are the decision-making processes at UNEA, for example, where an SRM resolution has been proposed twice and been withdrawn twice? Possibly it'll be again provided in December 2025. What are those processes where these scientific outputs can be plugged in? So that kind of work, I think, really captures interdisciplinarity, at least in this initial opening statement. So thank you.
Thank you, Hassaan. Wonderful. Okay, rounding up our statements from the front is Professor Ben Kravitz. He's an associate professor at Indiana University, which is where I happened to study chemistry many moons ago. So over to my friend, colleague, and former neighbor, or quasi-neighbor, Ben Kravitz.
Thank you. Jesse grew up about 20 minutes from where I live. So I'm a climate modeler, and what I want to do is get really practical about building partnerships. How do you do that in a way that goes beyond just feeling good? And it does feel good, but you know, in the end, we want to produce something. I'm going to speak from my own experience. Other people have different experiences. There are experts and disciplines devoted to these sorts of collaborations. So if you already know everything I'm going to say, great. The only discovery I'm claiming is personal discovery. If you disagree with me, great. I'm always happy to learn more ways to do this. So one of the things that I really want to underscore when we were originally talking about this is if you think about any successful collaboration, you will probably think of a person who really made it happen. Or maybe multiple people. The point being, when you have groups, especially groups of people with different backgrounds, different ideas, different ways of thinking, you need people skills. And it's not glamorous. It's not going to win you the Nobel Prize. It's easy to overlook. It's not really taught. Nobody taught me this stuff. They taught me how to, use high-performance computing systems, and that was my education. So Google did a study where they looked at their various teams and which teams were most successful. And the most successful teams had a person who helped the group gel. They didn't even necessarily bring expertise to the team. They were just likable, and they helped people get along. And that's how you build a successful team, because in the end of the day, we're all people. Another specific example from my own experience, so I was on a proposal review. We were defending our proposal to a panel. And there was one panelist who was just really going after us and questioning, why does this person need to be here? What is this person going to do? And the PI replied to them, look, this is our team. If you don't like it, decline the proposal, but we're not changing our team. This is who we are. And that felt really good. We've heard a lot of talk about emotions, and don't forget the emotional aspect of it. It really matters. If you don't feel good, you're not doing good work. You've heard about trust building and how important that is, basically this entire conference. I won't elaborate that, but I do want to underscore it. Patience is really important. I do want to get into a couple specific examples. All of the examples I'm going to talk about took years, literal years. And those are years taken away from my ability to do other things. So, I want to be a climate modeler. I got into it because I like programming. I think the physical science system is interesting, but I also value interdisciplinary collaboration, and I only have so many hours in the day. So I made a choice, and I'm very happy with it. But it probably cost me a few papers. Okay. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience. How many of you have been in an argument over what a small outdoor experiment is? What you define as big or small depends on where you come from, disciplinarily, nationality, whatever. I've seen people talk in circles for hours just over the words big and small. You have to learn each other's languages, even before you can build trust. This is a long process. But the point being, if you can build that sense of belonging, that's where the magic happens. So I'll give you a couple examples. I have examples of individual papers, programmatic examples, and community examples. So I have a first author paper in gender studies. And how that happened is C2G had an interview with Tina Sika. She's a lecturer in the UK, and she's a feminist scholar. And what she said was really interesting because she focused her arguments on this is how you do better science. And so I emailed her. I was like, tell me more. And so we had a Zoom call, which turned into many Zoom calls, which turned into me reading so many papers that, quite frankly, I didn't all understand because, I was learning a new discipline. But in the end, we used those principles to reevaluate a GeoMet paper that I had led several years prior, but from a new lens, pointing out what did we miss, what could we do better, sort of defining a framework using feminist science on how to go forward. It was a really valuable, fun experience. I learned a lot. I'm not getting rich in this job. I might as well have fun. And so it takes, that kind of dedication. It took a year and a half. This was during COVID, so I wasn't operating at 100% capacity anyway, but it worked. And I look back on that proudly, and I think we did some good work. So that's a paper level. On a program level, one thing we've been doing at IU is developing an education model around SRM. So we've worked with high school teachers or junior high teachers. We've brought them to IU and talked to them, how do you teach SRM to your students? And we've developed some lessons. We've co-developed some lessons. The lessons have changed throughout. I've had to learn a lot of pedagogy. you'll notice there's a theme running through here, which is the humility and willingness to learn. Like, I started out from nothing. When I walked into IU, I wasn't even a very good teacher, and now I'm learning pedagogy. So the point being, we all didn't know many things at one point. Like, I remember when I learned climate modeling, and now I'm considered an expert in it. So, you know, we can learn. You just have to be open to doing it. And then from a community level, building GeoMIP, which went from literally a letter that we emailed to a bunch of different climate modeling centers and had the first meeting in this crappy building at Rutgers. And I mean, come tomorrow and watch what Dan is currently running. It's amazing. And it's become this sort of rallying point for this community. And you know, it started small. It started by bringing in people. The first meeting was a bunch of us just sitting around talking about volcanoes. And it was great. And the first time I heard a presentation on the carbon cycle was a few years after that. The first time I heard a presentation at a meeting that had GeoMIP at it was on livestock was last year. And so we're still growing, we're still learning, we're still incorporating, and that's how a community is built. But the point being, everyone's been welcome. We want that expertise. We want all of these people involved. And Jesse's looking at me, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. So I've got some questions prepared, but I'm going to skip those because there's been too many words said from this side of the room. And I'm going to go straight over to questions from the floor. And if there's a quiet moment, then I'll jump in if necessary. So please, anybody, don't be shy. You're among friends.
First, quick question to Hassaan. You said quick question for Hassaan. You said that the first word, the main word that is used to describe SRM in one word is complex. It's not nuts. I'm surprised. It's a close second. Okay.
Yeah. So to put it into perspective, I would have to think back, and Whitney might be able to answer this, but we tend to ask this question sometimes before we start the engagement activity, and many times after as well. So I believe nuts might be before, and then once they've kind of walked through something about the science and something about the governance, the word complex and complicated is exactly what comes up. So people intuitively grasp this concept very quickly, and they understand that, okay, we are no longer near managing climate change, and that if we have to do this, it has to be studied very rigorously and across a lot of disciplines before we are even close to saying yes, no, maybe. So, Whitney, did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay.
Okay, I saw a hand. Here we go.
Yeah, thank you for the conversation. I'm wondering from the perspective of a social scientist in the space of doing public engagement. I know it depends on exactly what kind of research each social scientist is doing, but like, yeah, what do you think is a good threshold for social scientists to understand the science side of SRM and climate modeling and things like that? And what's a good way to get started? Because I think I understand the general mechanisms and like kind of generally how it works, but still have a lot of questions and a lot of knowledge gaps that I don't even know are there. So yeah, whoever wants to answer that.
Why don't I go down over here and see if either of you are willing to take that on? An idea of knowledge thresholds before one feels comfortable, I guess, might be the right word.
Yeah, but I think that you talk about two different things. One is public perception, right? So when you talk to the people, when you build trust in or community engagement in order to address certain topic that is important for the people and for the scientists. That is one aspect of the work of social science. But other thing that could be labeled as transdisciplinarity, because when you include stakeholders, social and institutional actors from grassroots or communities, then you're talking about transdisciplinarity. And interdisciplinarity is the combination of natural, social scientists, humanities, all working together to address a topic. So we have different traditions of knowledge, right? Humanities and social scientists will work on the human dimensions of climate change. I work on the human dimensions of climate change, social-political dimensions, cultural dimensions. Then we need to build a shared language with natural scientists to address a topic, because climate change for a modeler, I think it's totally different or has a different perspective or will be addressed in a different way. And social scientists work on people, right? So how people perceive, how people experience, how people make decisions about climate change. So, as I said before, we need to co-create questions, we need to co-create priorities, and we need to build a common language. What are we talking about? What are the main problems? And that, I think, it's the starting point. But at the same time, I know, and everybody here highlighted, it takes time. So I think that we are in a rush because climate change is urgent, we are in a climate crisis, but we need time to reflect on the knowledge we are producing. For whom? What are the best ways to produce knowledge that is co-produced? In social science, we talk about co-production of knowledge. Co-production means including a diversity of perspectives in the production of an outcome that will be relevant, legitimate, salient, and important for the people, right? So you need interaction, sustained interaction to build bonds of collaboration, build bonds of trust, but that takes time. And we need to take the time to do it because it's important.
Thanks.
Can I compliment?
Please, go ahead.
Yes, I think that the contribution of social sciences, as I mentioned, is not at the end or parallel. It's at the beginning, discussing which are the assumptions, social and political, that are embedded in the models. Because the models are not completely neutral, of course. So what oriented the construction of those models? What are the meanings of that are built in the models? So work, for example, from social studies of science and technology that goes beyond the development or the application of the models is a wonderful contribution and very rich can be. And so we need from the modeling teams, as Ben mentioned, modesty, humility, to accept this discussion, that the models are being constructed, not are the reality. So what we choose to put in the models and what we exclude from the models, and who will win with the with an experiment or a projection, and who will lose. These are things that did need to be clear, and so the contribution of social science is crucial, I think. But we have been discussing in these meetings that we had previously at this to this session, how could be more important in the future to have projects that showing social and atmospheric or mathematical or scientists, let's say, not have this separation. We have the socio-political fund and the modeling fund, and it's great. It's a wonderful step, but maybe another step is necessary to train us to discuss these issues. We are not prepared, we haven't learned yet how to do that. So we need to be open to the learning process. It takes time, yes, but it's inevitable.
Great, thanks. Over here to Olaf.
Hello, Olaf Corey, University of Leeds. I just want to say, it's probably more of a comment, that I really, really appreciated this panel's sensitive ways of describing this notion of interdisciplinarity and the attention to power relations as well between different epistemologies and methods. And particularly because interdisciplinarity is bandied around as a sort of buzzword and all funders want things to be interdisciplinary, but very few people with the imagination that this is just a question of sitting down, stirring the pot and everything is fine. But actually this is a zone of hierarchy, of interaction, of differential resources and status and et cetera, which I think you described really, really well, and I appreciate it. Ben is like, I'm really impressed with your reaching out as well in what you describe there. In fact, I remember being very surprised when I saw your name at the top of the feminist paper there, but that's all great. But the point that I wanted to also add to this is that it's not just a question of what we do when we're studying, because this exact question played out in quite dramatic form both at UNEA 4 in 2019 and UNEA 6 in 2024, that the mix of disciplines and the prioritization of knowledges was one of the major points of contention and conflict, with some countries wanting, quote unquote, the science to go first or to be further strengthened before other disciplinarities and questions were added. And this idea that somebody called it colonized disciplines being ones that simply supply either case studies or data to the dominant disciplines which frame the question and set up the whole sort of setup in itself is to me really core to when people ask me, are you in favor of research or not? I always want to say, I'm not in favor of a lopsided headlong charge in one disciplinary direction, because it has so much implications for, even if it's just experiments, it does color the narrative, as Dan also said in one of the earlier panels, that this sets narratives running as well. So I just think this is important for the process of studying, but I think it's something that's mirrored or is reflected in the political and at the highest international level.
No. I want to. And I want to underscore part of the comment. So as a climate modeler, I sit in a really privileged position. Like, I can produce numbers, and people want numbers. They want hard data. Another project I'm working on right now is we've been coding semi-structured interviews. Not the coding I'm used to, but different coding. And it is really hard. I always understood that qualitative research was useful. I don't think I had a full appreciation for it until I got my hands dirty with it. There's some challenging stuff out there that we just have to bring in and understand it's valuable if we're going to make sense of this problem.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Olaf. That's a really wonderful comment you've made, and one that I've been thinking about, DSG has been thinking about a lot, simply because the problem of climate change is underpinned by colonialism at its core, right? And exploitative capitalism. And so a solution that like SRM has those same colonial underpinnings. And so if you're going to want the science first, and you're not able to make the research questions of the natural science elements derive from an understanding of this overarching colonial capitalistic structure above it, you're going to miss a lot when you're trying to model things out. And so that's where interdisciplinarity is really crucial. And the time part is one part of it. The other part is the expense and resources. Social science work, doing semi-structured interviews are expensive in a very different way than modeling work, which is also expensive, but in a different way. And so understanding how the resources that funders could fund in these types of projects is really also crucial, because they'll understand very easily, okay, you need laptops and hardwares and servers and all those things. But you need to travel, you need hotel rooms, you need to be doing outreach to get to experts who you can do semi-structured interviews or whatever number of interview types you might want to do. That's the kind of expense that has, and the kind of time scale that has is also, I think, not fully understood by a lot of the proposal submissions within the SRM funding community. So thanks for raising those points.
Hi, yeah. It was very interesting hearing you describe the different kind of techniques, patience, humility, willingness to learn, to meet across disciplines. It all still felt quite intellectual. And I'm wondering how much you've explored, how much you can trust time, some sort of function of each other, but the intensity and the nature of the time can make that go faster maybe sometimes. And I wonder how much you've explored in your interdisciplinary adventures, going for walks in the woods, sitting around a fire, singing songs, dancing together, embodied connection. It sounds, yeah, people always go, oh no, that's starting to get a little hippie. Actually, this weekend I can't be there, it's driving me crazy. I helped set up the first carbon cleanup camp in the UK where a bunch of carbon removal people are doing just that. Because I went to some of these festivals and realized I didn't like the woo-woo, but I did like the dancing around the bonfire. And I thought, okay, maybe we can marry the science to the dancing around the bonfire. How much of that are you guys exploring before you get into your workshops and your, conceptual discussions?
Well, very interesting, your point. There is a paper, an article published by Norwegian team that explore the workshop. So it's an experiment where people from Chinook at Tromsø University in Norway used to do. They so in the article they analyze this experience. They go to the woods and they stay in a cabin, a group of interdisciplinary team, not very big, of course, and someone is cooking, the other is taking care of the fire, and they go on trails, trekking or whatever, and exchanging ideas. And so you build trust, you build confidence, and you start exchanging ideas. Well, what means uncertainty for me as a social? What means for you? Well, let's see, no? And we can not solve all the problems, but at least get to the soil. No, have a to start working together. It's a starting point, and that's very, very interesting. And I would like to participate once in this experiment. But I think that as well a clarification about social sciences. We are speaking about social sciences now and modeling, but like a block. Social sciences are not a block. We have many differences. Inés mentioned quantitative, qualitative, but I would go further beyond and say that there are different theoretical frameworks. So maybe some modeling persons or researchers, let's say, are more identified with more positivistic approaches in social sciences and will not understand very well interpretative, comprehensive approaches that are different from the positivist. And so we need to be careful as well about that. I don't know which are exactly the differences in the modeling community, but I'm sure they are. And so it rings something for you. Well, so I think that is interesting to think about that as well, to make things more complex, a little more complex.
Just a couple of quick comments, and thank you for this rich discussion. We in my department, which is geography, so it's very interdisciplinary. We often have more heated debates between the positivist and the interpretive social scientists than between natural scientists and social scientists. So I think, I just want to underscore, I appreciate underscoring the difficulty of doing this, because it's often difficult to arrive at what the right, even to agree on a question. For example, STS takes as important to understand what sorts of imaginations and conceptual models underlie, for example, climate models. But that's not necessarily something a climate modeler is, so even arriving at the questions. And then just an anecdote, I have not worked in the SRM space really, but I've done a lot of thinking about transdisciplinarity in climate change. And, how you synthesize at the end, because NSF, while it still existed, always wanted a synthesis. And the kind of synthesis they demanded was always a kind of modeling, very positivistic kind. So I was, I do ethnography. I had a colleague who does plant ecology, and we didn't get it funded until we added an agent-based modeler, and neither of us believed anything the agent-based model told us, right? But that was, there's just like all these structures that make it really difficult to be truly transdisciplinary, so yeah.
Any response to that? You don't have to, but you may.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I think that every social scientist have experienced the same situation as you. It's difficult to get funding for social science to work on certain topics. And for example, SRM, I have always been interested in this topic, but now that I can get the funding, I can start my job. So sometimes it's not easy, but you can get a way to do the research on the topic and to strengthen dialogues or create collaborations with natural scientists or earth system scientists.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this discussion. I'm Madeleine Lutt from Colchester Climate Foundation, and what I'm hearing a lot is that funding is a massive lever, obviously, to encourage these types of interdisciplinary collaboration, and also maybe something that we haven't really talked about is sort of intergeographical collaborations too. I'd kind of like to turn the question back at some of those on the panel and maybe some in the room, but other than the kind of funding calls, are there any other things that we can be doing outside of funding? Because a funding call is a very limited opportunity, in my view, to kind of encourage that disciplinarity, and it needs to make sure that these things are sustained over time. So I'd love to hear about, in an ideal world, what we could do to foster this interdisciplinarity better. Thank you.
I'll take a first stab at it. You're absolutely right. Like, funding is like a linchpin sort of thing in making sure that these sorts of topics and the discussions and research and then further engagements, it's always very helpful, because without having the ability to have people secured in their positions and having the ability to meet or do any kinds of like interactions, and it doesn't have to always be physical or something, is important. But there are, I think Ben really hit it where he said, like, it's about humility, willingness to learn, and having the ability to communicate with each other using common language, which is very difficult. And when you don't know something, a lot of us, we can either really become shy and shy away from it, or get very aggressive and take like, oh no, this is the right way to go about it. And what I've learned in all of my work streams, that includes the research part, but also the engagement part, is you have to go in it thinking I know less than what the other person knows or what this topic really encompasses, which is just true. None of us know everything about SRM. There's a massive amount of uncertainty there. But you also don't know in a separate discipline what are the key challenges that they can perceive in a way that you don't. So the most recent example is we've been doing sustained engagement in South and Southern Africa for the last 2 years. So this is our third time in Cape Town. And last year we hosted a series of 3 workshops for Africa, looking at what African perspectives on SRM were, both for science and governance. And last week, we did one solely focused on human rights. And the questions that came up from there were very different. And so just changing the lens from science and governance to civil society action and human rights allowed us to have different types of questions be posed, which now, I mean, our hope is we'll be able to take them to people like Dan and Ben and be like, okay, so these are the things that are important. But that is only able to happen because we are lucky enough to have the funding to be able to do this. But many of the participants have asked us, how do you want to continue this? And right now, we don't have a next step, but we know that we're going to have that next step. So again, it comes back to all of it's super important to do, but without funding, it is really challenging. But these types of like sustained engagement plans of like network and expansion only occur through this type of work where you do something and then you find a new partner who's like, oh, I'm interested in this, but can we change the lens? And you do it that way. So that way you continue to be able to keep up with people and participants and through these activities, but you are you're asking and answering different questions. So I hope that's helpful. Sorry.
So, but I think that funding is crucial. It's not a detail. It's crucial because the calls for funding research need to involve time to do interdisciplinarity. Because in general, now we can see calls for research in climate change. They are all mentioning interdisciplinarity. It's a must. No? But what does it mean for the funding agencies? Interdisciplinarity, if they put a timeline, 2 years, 1 year and a half, or whatever. So you don't have time to build interdisciplinarity, or sometimes the group contract a sociologist, and then they think, well, we are interdisciplinary. And no, it's not really serious work being done. So I think funding is important, but the calls need to be responsible as well as what they mean by interdisciplinarity. They need to understand that it's not something that is, well, just said and done. You need to build that, and time is crucial.
I'll give you a wish list, which you may or may not be able to do. So, yes, funding is important, but in terms of what it can buy you. So the freedom to sit and think or talk with people about what's important. The freedom to not just carry out the interdisciplinary work, but analyze it. I mean, there's a joke when you're running field campaigns, they'll give you all the money in the world to go collect the data, but nothing to analyze it. So having a holistic perspective on that sort of thing. And also, I want to go back to what Mark was talking about, which is I'm a hardcore introvert. I'm very shy. If I haven't met you, it's just because I'm timid. But getting people around a campfire is not just a fun idea. It's how we're wired. And the simple things like that really do matter.
Okay, and I think our final word, did you want to say something? Okay, to María Inés.
Yeah, okay. For people from the global south, Latin American countries, funding is key. We need funding to do the research, right? That is the first step. But the second step for me is how we build capacities among researchers to do the job. So, for example, I'm an anthropologist. In my university, there are not so many anthropologists working on climate change. I think why that is. It's a really key topic. Why? I would like to see many people as me working on this topic, working with me, and build a network of scientists in Argentina and in Latin America and the Caribbean countries to raise the voice of our own region. So I think that building capacities is the second step. And then, for example, thanks to Degrees, we got a grant from Degrees to work on public perception. We could hire 2 research assistants that work with us. So they are interested in the topic, they can learn with us, we can learn with them. So that is the thing that we need to build a network, yeah? And also not only within the Global South, but across the Americas and between Global North and Global South. Because without the Global North, it's impossible. Because we need to exchange perspectives, so that is key. But also how we build capacities in our countries with policymakers, that is another topic. But yeah, funding is key, but then capacities, how we build capacities is also important.
And also South-South collaboration, because it just occurred to me over the course of just this forum, there are 3 Global South studies on MCV now. One in Latin America, one in South Asia, and one in Southeast Asia, I believe. And now, like, we just started talking to each other. We're like, oh, you're also doing this and this, and how are you finding this, and how are you going to communicate it to policymakers? So it's just like the facility that Degrees has provided through these grants has been able to connect Southern researchers with other Southern researchers. And you find a lot of common themes that they all have to address with their policymakers, their civil society, all sorts of groups. Thanks.
Well, that's the type of comment that I like to have to wrap up the final parallel session of the Degrees Global Forum. My observation coming from this, and I guess I'll use the moderator's prerogative to get the last word, and that is we barely touched on methodology, right? So this is a forum, this was a conversation about interdisciplinarity, but so much of the attention was on patience, people skills, learning, institutions, and like everything besides like how would you do interdisciplinary research itself, which either suggests it's an elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about and it's impossible, or it turns out that's not the problem, and we'll cross that bridge and I'm not worried about it, but it's these social and procedural things in the sense of just going through these processes to learn. So that's my takeaway from this session. So on behalf of Degrees and everybody, let's thank our speakers today. Okay, we now have a break for 30 minutes, and then I might be shouting at you to go to the main hall for the final plenary at 3:45. Thank you.